Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, and today I want to explore the world of voice tech and dare to look beyond just asking a digital assistant a question and explore how voice technology will transform our digital world and how we interact with it. So today I've invited the CEO of a company called WillowTree onto the podcast. And for those of you that don't know, WillowTree is one of Inc. magazine's fastest growing private companies of 2018, one of Deloitte's Technology's Fast 500 for 2019. And if that's not impressive enough, they also create digital products for big name consumer brands such as HBO, National Geographic, Johnson & Johnson, Pepsico, and a list goes on and on. But today's guest believes strongly that Siri and Alexa could face extinction quite soon, because they will, in his informed view, be replaced by Voice 2.0, a multimodal experience of humans speaking or getting text and graphic results. But enough from me. I don't want to reveal any spoilers now. So let's get him onto the podcast right now and learn more how voice tech could transform our future. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Tobias Dengel. I'm the CEO of a company called WillowTree, based here in Virginia in the U.S. We have about 550 folks who work here, and we're a digital product agency, which for a lot of people doesn't mean very much. But what it does mean is we build products on behalf of other companies. So companies come to us and say, we need XYZ built. And those things are usually apps or websites or voice experiences or an over-the-top app. And we tend to work for large international companies like HBO. We just did the app for Fox Sports for the Super Bowl. We work for Pepsi and Amex. So it's really working with large companies who need digital help to launch a product of some sort.
And one of the reasons I was excited to get you on today is I think most people listening to this podcast, wherever they are in the world, are either self-isolating or they're just coming out of self-isolating as the lockdowns are eased up throughout the world. So I'm curious, do you think people who have been spending more time in their homes, especially if they're working remotely, are using voice technology and digital technology more and more and getting more familiar, confident with and comfortable with using it? Is that something that you're seeing?
We're seeing a ton of data right now that the move to digital within society has been accelerated. I think actually Microsoft issued a report yesterday that the trend towards digital, both within the enterprise and how consumers use it, has moved forward or accelerated about 2 years via the whole work from home, stay at home, quarantine scenario. And I just see it in my life. I mean, my dad's 88. He's never used Amazon in his life. He's now on Amazon and sending me emails like, can you believe I can order detergent on the internet? And so I think it's opened up a whole new category of users, especially the older demographic, and also a demographic that maybe didn't trust digital so much in things like online banking, where historically, there have been meaningful parts of the population that just didn't trust those systems and wanted to go to their local bank branch, and now have been forced through this quarantine to really use the digital tools. Part of that, I think, is also a rapid move towards voice. We spend a lot of time on voice. We think voice is the next big thing in tech. We get asked all the time, what's the next big thing? We think it is voice. And I hope to spend a lot of time today talking about why we think that is and how it's going to happen, and that it's probably not going to happen the way Alexa and Siri operate today, that there have to be some pretty fundamental changes. But that all said, I think people are starting to use voice a lot more in a from home environment, and Amazon has released a bunch of data around that as well, that sales of their Echo devices are way up, and they're seeing way more engagement as people are at home, and it's just faster for certain things. And I think this is the key point, for certain things to use voice than it is to use a screen and a keyboard.
Yeah, I did see the very beginnings of this trend. I think it was early last year when I saw it was my nephews, and they were looking at their grandma texting something or putting something into their her mobile device, and they both said to her, "Why are you typing it? It's so much easier just to use your voice." And that moment there, I could see that this almost wave of these younger users, and that's how they're using the internet now.
100%, and it's all kinds of interfaces. My kids, the youngest, I've got twins that are 7, and they, we try and keep them off the screens. But I think one of the big victims of this quarantine has been those of us who've tried to keep our kids to minimal screen exposure. We've just surrendered now. But when they interface with their Apple TV or their cable TV remote, it's all via voice. And this concept that we grew up with of a television channel is completely foreign to them. They think everything should be on demand and they should be able to just say it.
And I think most people listening would have asked Alexa, Siri, or Google a question at some point. And like you said, things do have to change. So why do you think the current design of voice hasn't yet transformed how humans interact with technology? What are the big reasons there, do you think?
Yeah, so I think when a new technology emerges, we as humans tend to apply our old paradigms of thinking to that new technology. So when you look at, the first cars were really horse-drawn carriages with an engine put in the front. And the first TV shows were really just the taping of radio shows and or plays. But the whole medium takes a while to evolve. And I think when voice came, the natural inclination we all had was to say, well, this is human-like, and this is kind of like a chat bot, but with voice. And so let's do that. And I think that's missed a couple of really important points that are all coming to the forefront now. And this is why voice has been the fastest adoption in human history, even faster than the smartphone in terms of how fast it got into 50% of households in Europe and the US. But there haven't been the breakthroughs that happened in the early days of the internet or of mobile. There hasn't been the Uber moment where someone says, oh my God, it's transformed an industry. And we spent a lot of time thinking about that. And we think it comes down to human trust and the human relationship with technology. And to dive into that a little bit, you have to peel apart what trust is and how humans trust each other. And there's really two forms of trust. There's emotional trust and there's cognitive trust. Emotional trust is a very human relationship with another human being where often within less than a second, but certainly within less than a minute, you decide whether you trust someone that you just met. And we're really good at that. And that is an important part of our history and how we evolved, because we had to meet someone from outside the village or from another tribe, and we had to pretty quickly decide, is this going to be a fight or are we going to be friends? And it was a life or death decision. And one of the big mistakes I think that we've made in designing voice experiences is we try to make them very human-like. And there's this concept of the uncanny valley that was developed by Professor Mori in Japan, in Tokyo, in the 1970s, which established that the more human-like you make something without it being actually human, the more bizarre and less trustworthy it feels to us. It becomes like a zombie, and it raises all kinds of alarm bells in our head. And I think what's going on is we're judging these voices as if they're human, and then we're saying, wait a second, they're not actually human. And then the trust kind of erodes pretty quickly, and deep inside of our being, we start to have a negative reaction towards some of these voice experiences. So one core thesis we have is we've tried to make voice too human. The second is, when you look at the second part of trust, it's cognitive trust. So that's the trust that develops over a long period of time. And it's basically, does this person do what they say they are going to do? And you obviously don't know that the first minute you meet someone, but you develop that over time, right? We had a call scheduled for 1:00 today, and we both showed up. So you and I now have a relationship. They're like, all right, I can trust Neil to do what he's going to say, and Tobias can be trusted to do what he's going to say. So we're building a relationship of cognitive trust. A lot of what's going on with voice has not built cognitive trust for two reasons. One is the tech just isn't there. There's a lot of misunderstanding, et cetera, like the system doesn't understand you. But the biggest issue is it hasn't really solved the problems that we want a new technology to solve. The core reason that we want to use voice, right, is it's faster. But that's only part of the equation. We can speak faster. In your example previously, your teenage nephews were saying you can speak much faster than you can type. That's factually correct. You can speak 3 times as fast as you can type on average. The problem is we can also read and observe graphics much faster than we can listen. So if you create a voice-only experience where a human speaks and then we have to listen, it's really frustrating and it destroys all the cognitive trust we might have with the platform. And an example is we're doing it every day of how this is going to evolve. Your teenage nephews, they speak into their devices to send a message, but then they read the message when it comes back because it's so much faster than listening. And that's really the most basic example of a multimodal experience where we think everything is going. And when things get multimodal, that's when the breakthroughs in voice are going to happen.
And I've never actually thought of that before. It makes so much sense. Like you said, we read so much quicker than we actually listen. But can you, just for set the scene and get everybody on board with this, can you expand on how these multimodal voice experiences can actually deliver this unprecedented speed, value, and trust?
Yeah, so the easiest for me is always through an example. So we do a lot of work with Regal Cinemas, which is the largest cinema chain in the US. If you ask Alexa today what movies are playing tonight, Alexa can answer. Unfortunately, no one wants to sit through the answer because it will ask you to pick a theater and then it will give you the movies and then it will give you the 3 or 4 start times for each movie. And about 3 minutes later, Alexa is finished reporting back and you've lost complete track or interest in anything that Alexa's been telling you. On the other hand, if you ask Alexa or you ask Siri what movies are playing tonight, and instead it gives those to you on a screen, either your TV screen or most likely right on your mobile device that's tied into Alexa or Siri, obviously, and you can see all the movie show times, and then you can just say, all right, I'd like 2 tickets for Star Wars at 8, and then the app processes that. Now you've taken a transaction that takes about a minute today to do on an app alone, and you've done it in about 10 or 15 seconds. And so we know anything you can take from a minute to 10 seconds is going to change how humans interact with technology, right? That is an order of magnitude kind of change. And that micro example is what's going to be happening everywhere. The conversation we have with machines is going to be us speaking, but then the machine responding via text or graphics and us reading the response. It's not going to be a voice-to-voice relationship.
It's a great example. So do you think giving mobile apps a voice will be the next step for brands to reimagine those customer experiences? And are you noticing any concern from brands that are handing over their authentic voice to Amazon, Apple, and Google, etc.?
Yeah, so we think there will be some voice experiences that will start with an Alexa or a Siri and then go into the app. And there will be other voice, which we think will be the majority over time, that will just be in the app. So a little example of how that's happening today is in the Waze app, there's a giant microphone button and you can speak your destination or directions into Waze, and then it'll pick it up and then it'll give you a graphic reply. Waze doesn't speak back to you in that regard. And that's another example. I think that mic button is going to be a really important part of every app you see over the next 12 to 24 months. And whether it's ordering food from a restaurant, I mean, we have a demonstration that in the best pizza ordering apps that exist today in the US, whether it's Papa John's or Domino's, et cetera, it still takes about 45 seconds to a minute to go through the process of selecting what size pie you want, selecting the toppings, et cetera. where really you just want to be able to say, get me 2 pizzas, one that's pepperoni and mushrooms and one that's plain. And then you should be able to visibly confirm that and then see it and then confirm it via voice. And it's that type of interaction that we think is going to be happening everywhere. And once you start thinking about that, you can think about almost any consumer interaction, but also process within a business that's going to be transformed by voice over the next 2 to 3 years. And one example I use is the amount of time we all spend typing. It's still an incredible amount of time for the average white collar worker in Western Europe or the US. It's 2 to 3 hours a day of typing. All of that can happen 3 times as fast if we were just able to use our voice effectively.
And for everyone listening that are just hearing about WillowTree for the very first time, can you tell me a little bit more about exactly what WillowTree is and how you're actually helping clients realize this potential of this rapidly evolving mobile technologies?
Yeah, so we started a little over 10 years ago, originally doing mobile apps. So 2008, 2009, the iPhone SDK opened up, and a year later, everyone in the world wanted an app, and there were not a lot of people that knew how to build those apps. And it was a very interesting time because Apple, when they opened up, they did it with Objective-C, which was an Apple-based language that a very small percentage of software developers knew a lot about because it was the Mac operating system language, and that's really the only place it was used. And so we happened to know a few of those folks, and so we got started early on, and there was a ton of demand for what we were doing. And we, of course, added Android over time and web capability, but where things got really interesting for us is a couple of years after that, folks started asking us, well, we don't want you to just build the app that we've designed. We want you to help design the app. And then 2 years later, the questions got really interesting, which was, well, we don't want you to design the app we want you to tell us what we should build. And that's when our business really changed. And we were dealing, with the executive team and the boardroom of some of the largest companies in the world, helping them answer the question, where's digital going? How can I how should I prioritize my spend vis-a-vis the consumer relationship and the internal workings of my company? And now there's a name for that. It's called digital transformation. We didn't know that at the time. We just thought it's called building cool technology and building very useful technology. But of course, it's now been named digital transformation. But so we started doing that about 5 years ago. And, at the end of the day, it's all about figuring out what is going to make life better and easier and faster for end users, and what, really focusing on what problems we're solving for them. And then how do we find the technology to do that? I think the dangerous thing that companies do, or anyone does, is say, all right, I want to build an app that does X. Really, we should always be thinking, I want to solve X, or this is the pain point that my customers have or my company has. Is there a way to use technology to help solve that? And that's really where we sit right now. And that's why we think voice is such an important part of the puzzle, because it often helps solve those problems.
And I also read a great blog post on your site about how brands can actually thrive using push notifications. And I'm curious about this as well, because it's such a hard balance to get right between getting that useful information and pushing it to a device and feeling intrusive and annoying. So for anyone that's listening that hasn't read that, can you offer a bit of an overview?
Yeah. So most marketing budgets and most marketing today that's done digitally still happens via email. And the open rate, depending on the company, et cetera, is certainly in the low single digits in terms of percentage. Often it's below 1%, but certainly below 5%. So it's a broadcast kind of approach that is really akin to radio or TV, where you're just mass broadcasting a message and you hope a couple people who get it find it useful. Push is very different. And I think it's what email could have been if we had the technology 10 years ago to make email marketing good. The key factor around push is that still to this day, over 50%, and in certain demographics, over 80% of push notifications are read. So you've got this incredibly powerful mechanism to get to the end user. The problem is if you misuse it and you just send general push notifications that are not of interest to the end user, they'll turn it off. And now you've cut off what we believe is the most powerful marketing engine that exists on the planet today. The way to avoid that is to be very selective and not send a lot of push. But when you send it, make sure you're using the latest tool stacks that are out there. And there's a whole group of those that we help companies implement to optimize the message for the specific end user so that they find it of relevance, right? And so don't send me, as an example, a lot of texts if you're a movie chain about romantic comedies, because that's just not my thing. If you want to send me an adventure movie or a new version of a Monty Python movie, I'm all over that. But you better know that before you start sending it to me, and you better have used all the data at your disposal to trigger that notification that's going to appeal to me.
And what excites you about the future of all these emerging technologies, and how do you think you'll be able to leverage them at WillowTree? I appreciate you've not got a crystal ball, but is there anything in particular that excites you?
Well, I would say a couple things. So one thing right now is we are working with a couple of state agencies here, and it's for several states in the U.S. and research institutions around the response to COVID-19. And we're doing this all on a pro bono basis to help with contact tracing and with testing, and to get replies to people around tests, and then to use that data effectively so that our government officials know how to respond to to COVID-19. The response in the states, at least, has been very general, right? An entire state will get shut down. And that, as we get smarter and smarter about what COVID-19 is about, that's a very blunt method. What we need to be doing over the next year or two until there's a vaccine, until there's herd immunity, is we need to be much more specific, and we need to find out, all right, this community needs to go into quarantine, or even within this community, this demographic needs to be in quarantine for some amount of time so that the rest of the economy can keep on functioning and support and financially support the whole ecosystem. And so that's a ton of fun, right? Is how do we use technology to battle something that's come out of nowhere and has had such a massive and devastating impact on so many lives. In terms of technology, we spend a lot of time looking at what's real and what's not real. And it always comes back to, is it solving a human problem? So 5-6 years ago, if you went to the big consumer electronics show in Vegas, all the rage was 3D television. And there were projections that by 2020, 80% of American households would have 3D TVs. The reality is I've never seen a 3D TV in a household 5 years later. And the problem, right, is that what did 3D TV solve? It didn't. It was the classic great technology in search of a market versus a problem set that could be solved by technology. And I would posit Google Glass and a lot of the AR and VR solutions outside of gaming and a few specific areas within the enterprise have fallen into the same category. I think it's really cool tech. It's a lot of fun, but is it something we're going to use every day? Probably not. So on the other side of that, I think, as we talked about earlier, is voice. I think voice is going to be like mobile, where in 2 or 3 years, it's everywhere and it becomes so pervasive that we don't even notice it's there. But it's going to be different than an Alexa. It's going to be different than a two-way, relationship with voice. I always joke that the worst name of all is that they call these things smart speakers, because you actually don't want to hear them speak. They should be called smart mics, because we want to be speaking to them, and then the response should be on a screen.
And I think now more than ever, businesses are going to be looking to innovate. And historically, recessions have actually proven to be a catalyst for innovation. So before you came on the podcast, though, I did a little bit of research and I saw on your website that you state innovation doesn't happen around a boardroom table. So can you tell me a little bit more about how you innovate as a company and for your customers?
Yeah, so there's data out there that if innovation starts with the technology or an idea, it tends to be successful only about 5% of the time. Yeah. Versus if it starts with a problem, it's successful about 80% of the time. So a lot of the work we do with our clients is identifying problems through tools like journey maps. So for anyone who's not familiar with a journey map, you basically take an experience and you map out how someone who's experiencing that would live through that. And so again, we do a lot of work with movie theaters. It's a fun example because everyone, or most people at least, go to the movies. But it starts with, should you go to the movie? Is someone interested in going to the movies versus going out to the pub or not? So how do you get people interested in going to the movies? And then they have to select the movie, et cetera. And you map that process out, and it's really interesting where there are pain points and stress. So people get excited about going to the movies, but then they get really stressed out, especially if they're going with their spouse, around finding the right movie for them. And there's all these different types of people. Some people will go to almost anything. Some people look at 10 or 20 reviews. Some people get, and I'm probably on that list, into a pretty heated debate with their spouse because they have kids at home, so they get to see one movie a month, and it seems like a really big deal to get it wrong. And you want to find something you're both going to like. And then you show up at the movie theater and you want to get popcorn, but the line's too long. So you go to your seat because you have this thing called that, and this is a true example. We worked with a movie theater chain and we started calling it seat anxiety. And so then we start asking ourselves, well, how can we use technology to solve seat anxiety? And the answer in this case is you can pre-order food that's waiting for you. So the way Panera and different restaurants in the U.S. do now, and you can pick it up and go right to your seat. And so now the big advantage to the movie theaters, they're selling more of their very high margin food and beverage items, and the advantage to the consumer is they got what they wanted and they didn't have to wait in line. And so it's figuring out what are the problems and then finding the technology, and that usually requires a really, really deep dive. A lot of time, to figure that out. We actually put our folks into uniforms at the movie theater, serving people, asking people what was going on, observing. And that's really the way we think innovation happens best, not ideating at the boardroom level about what the problems might be.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Before I do let you go, could I ask that you remind everyone listening of where they can find WillowTree online and also contact your team if they've got any additional questions?
Sure. It's at WillowTreeApps.com. So it's WillowTreeApps.com. Or you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. There's only one Tobias Dengel, so it's TOBIAS-DENGEL. Actually, I'm incorrect. There's a 10-year-old soccer player somewhere in Germany with the same name, but you'll probably be able to differentiate between the two of us.
Man, when he makes it big, that's it. You're off page one of Google. Well, I've loved chatting with you today. So much value there as well on how multimodal voice experiences can deliver unprecedented speed, value, and trust. And also just talking about giving mobile apps a voice and how that could be the next steps for brands to reimagine that customer experience. But more than anything, I just love that bit on innovation there you were talking about and solving real problems first and putting the tech second. So much value in that conversation. But more than anything, just thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Neil. It's been great.
So many great talking points here. And I love the bit that highlighted that, yes, we can speak to voice assistants quicker than we can type, but the reality is that we can read quicker than we listen, which shows what is wrong with the current setup. And anyone that has used their voice and then painfully had to listen to a list of options will testify to that too. And that's why the current design of voice technology hasn't transformed how we interact with technology yet. But if we do dare to look into the future and explore how a multimodal voice experience could actually deliver unprecedented speed, value, and trust. That's where things get exciting. But enough from me. Let me know your thoughts, experiences, and vision for the future by simply emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you can learn how you can work with me or even browse through 1,200 plus episodes. And for those of you that have stuck to the end of this episode and my call to action request, I'll leave you with a little teaser here. I've recently been approached by a big tech company to host a different podcast as well. Have no fear, I'm not leaving you guys. This daily tech podcast will continue, but there might be something else on the horizon too. So if you've got any questions about that, again, email me. Other than that, I'll leave you on that nail-biting teaser and return again tomorrow with another great guest. So thanks for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.